Hello, all, and welcome to Bennis Stories, a series of interviews with people who knew, loved, were influenced by, worked with, wrote with, were students and mentees of Warren Bennis. This is Kate Bennis. I'm Warren's daughter. This series is created for the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute at the University of Cincinnati's Lindner College of Business. My partner in this endeavor is Betsy Myers. Betsy was a dear friend of my father's and a colleague, and worked with him at the Center for Public Leadership at Harvard's Kennedy School of Government as its executive director. She has also been a senior advisor to both President Clinton and the President Obama, and actually is a senior advisor at the Warren Bennis Leadership Institute. Today, Betsy and I are delighted to welcome Joline Godfrey. As we'll hear, Joline first met my father in her first job after grad school as a social worker at the Polaroid Corporation. Dad was there as a consultant and made sure Joline was at the leadership table. Joline has been an innovator in financial education and well-being for families for over 3 decades. Her unconventional career as a clinical social worker led her to specialize in family and gender issues in the context of work and business. An invitation from Inc. magazine to host a series of dinner table gatherings for women entrepreneurs is documented in her first book, Our Wildest Dreams. Insights gained from those tables led to deep curiosity about how women acquire financial fluency. In 1992, she founded An Income of Her Own, the country's first nonprofit focused exclusively on financial education for girls and women. In 1996, she published No More Frogs to Kiss, 99 Ways to Give Economic Power to Girls. That same year, Godfrey launched Independent Means to provide financial education for girls and boys. In 2003, she published Raising Financially Fit Kids. Her most recent venture is Bounce 10, a financial readiness program for children 4 to 10. Godfrey was a Kellogg Leadership Fellow and has been recognized in features for The Today Show, Oprah, Fortune, Business Week, Inc. magazine, and the New York Times. She is the subject of a Harvard Business School case study. Welcome, Joline. Let's begin. Hi, Joline.
Hello, Kate and Betsy.
We are so grateful that you are able to be a part of this and in so many ways. And these podcasts we're hoping will be a library that will be available at the University of Cincinnati for their 40,000 undergraduates. And hopefully this leadership development training is going to be in every undergraduate experience. Then there's going to be executive education and in all of the professional schools. So this is going to be a very important sort of record of people that actually knew Dad. They can quote his books. It's really interesting, but they never knew him. So we're trying to get the stories from the people who really knew him well. So Joline, this is what we're just basically starting with. How did you know Dad? Did you collaborate, work with him, his influence on you, your influence on him? Just starting with just the friendship and the collegiality.
Oh my. No, I went back and checked the numbers because I feel very old these days, but he was 25 years older than I was. And the first time I met him, I have only a dim recollection of, but it's important that early meeting because he did have impact very early on. I was working at the Polaroid Corporation and he was doing some consultation for Polaroid. And these were also the years, I don't know if you remember, but there was something called the National Training Lab, NTL.
Oh, and other people have mentioned this too, up in Bethel.
Up in Bethel, exactly. So because of the overlap with Polaroid and NTL in those years, I got exposed to him early on, but I was an idiot. I was just a sweet young thing, working at the Polaroid Corporation, kind of in the big city, as it were. And I didn't know what I didn't know. He was beyond kind. And of course, I know everybody will say the same thing. There was kindness, so that he was as good to somebody who was stupid and just learning as he was to, the highest, most esteemed human being in the world. And I think it was that sort of democratic approach to mentoring, if you will, that really made him unusual. And so really, as a very, very young, inexperienced, young professional woman in those years, it was must have been the late 70s, early 80s when we overlapped at the Polaroid Corporation. those were the years where women in the corporation, I mean, that's Betsy, I think you and I were just meeting in those very same years.
Yeah.
Women were getting big opportunities,
No.
but he provided me a level of gravitas in this big company because he was respectful of me. And I do think that is one of the key lessons that we all need to take from him, that gravitas and respect are critical gifts to give anyone in leadership. I was an anomaly at the Polaroid Corporation, there as a licensed MSW social worker in a world of what was then considered a high-tech company. Nobody knew what the hell to do with me. And it didn't matter to Warren. He was taking me seriously. We had obviously I had read many of the things he had already written. I had studied many of the masters that he had in his own education. And so there was common ground we had, and that allowed him to bestow on me, if you will, a level of respect that honestly made such a difference in my own career in this funny company where, instant photography was the
Yeah.
language of the place. So anyway,
Joline, so was he a consultant or what was his
he
role?
was a consultant. I honestly don't know how he got there or who brought him in. I didn't have enough, stature at the time to have been privy to that. But I know that he kept wandering across my space because I was the in-house shrink at the time. I was spending a lot of time in the C-suites. And of course, that's where he was. And so that's why our paths crossed. Um, and he was talking wisdom about leadership even then. And at the time, Polaroid had Edwin Land, who was one of the great founders of one of the great companies at the time, kind of mid-century modern technology company, really. And there were already seeds of difficulty there that I think Warren came in and chatted about, and they were trying to make transitions, and I'm sure that's why he brought him in. So that was my first experience of Warren very early in my career. It was in that way kind of an imprinting, if you will.
Hmm.
And I think I would say to 18, 19, 20-year-olds, pay attention to the eminent grees who come through your life because you may not get them. You may not even know what they are lending to you. But 20 years later, it will come clear.
Yeah.
Uh, and I do think that, and it's not about, he wrote, what was it, Geeks and Geezers. It was not about age. It was just about the accumulation of wisdom he had that he was willing to share.
Mm.
And I think young people don't I mean, hell, I didn't either. The young people don't understand that wisdom is part of the intellectual capital you get. And if you don't capture it and honor it and archive it some way, you lose it, you miss it. And Warren always had a lot of that intellectual capital he was willing to invest in you. And just as you would a stock or a bond, you needed to pay attention to that level of capital you were getting. I could go on, but as you can see, I didn't even understand what he was giving me a lot of times early on. But, as I sit here today, it's like, oh no, that was instrumental early on. The consciousness doesn't kick in. And I do think one of the other things he used to talk about to that point is, oh, what was it? May have just left my brain. It was, he believed that leadership was self-discovery. And, I was a shrink basically, and I think I was halfway through a decade of my own therapy. And I think that it's another place where I do want generations, young generations, current generations to remember, not just understand it, but remember that his connection of self-discovery with leadership is really core to what he was teaching. In social work school, that was described as the use of self as a tool. And the training is all about, you must be aware, you must be self-aware, but you also must be conscious so you can use who you are in ways that are impactful and meaningful and human and kind. I think that in that way, in this, again, weird way I didn't understand, he validated what I was trying to do in this big high-tech company. And no one else there could have done that. They didn't know. I mean, I give them a lot of credit for hiring me, even if they didn't know what the hell to do with me. But he did. He understood that self-discovery was at the core of leadership. I don't know how much people are talking about that today, though they need to be, Lord knows, given what's going on.
So we are creating or helping the people at University of Cincinnati by gathering all this information and speaking to all the people who knew him, ideas for what is core to the curriculum. And every single person says it in a different way, but the same thing, which is self-knowledge.
Yes.
Self-knowledge. And even if you're a kid, self-knowledge. Like, what is important to you? What have you learned? The other thing that I really want to ask you about is, you say he gave you gravitas. That's so interesting. How does someone give that to someone else? Respect, I understand, right? You can give someone respect, to listen to them, call upon them, listen deeply to their ideas, take them seriously. But how do you give someone gravitas?
He spent time with me in such a way that I was able to say in a meeting when he wasn't around, oh, yes. And what Dr. Bennis said was, and if I said it with authority, it was like, oh, okay. So it's gravitas by association. And having had access to his thinking and conversation with him, it was right there for me. And so when it came up in whatever the situation was, for me to be able to say something that I quoted directly. So if I could say, and in that meeting with Dr. Bennis, I heard, or he said, it's not just that I was reading or I was writing a memo and it was there in a quote. I got this directly from him. That is the giving you gravitas, because of course everybody wanted to spend time with him, but not everybody could. And I had, for whatever reason, again, I wish I had a better memory of it, but for whatever reason, I did have access.
The other thing that you mentioned is pay attention. I have written so many blog posts about Dad. The two things are curiosity, asking questions, and paying attention. Remember, he said, I want to be a first-class noticer.
Yes.
So what you're saying about that, pay attention, is so important. And I think in academia, I for sure got really sucked into what is my grade instead of what do I pay attention to.
And I think we've got this whole system that encourages you to pay attention to that. You know, I like milestones too. I think milestones are important, but these silly grade things, I don't know.
I know.
It just send people off in a wrong direction.
Pay attention. And also the idea that pay attention even if you don't know what it means or what it will mean to you.
Right.
Right. And I also love that you're bringing in sort of the wisdom, because that's what we're doing right here. We're trying to tap into a little bit people who knew him in person so they can tell us what that wisdom was.
This whole conversation reminds me, this is kind of who he was and what he did. Do you know what I mean? Because he did the same thing to me when I was executive director, the Center for Public Leadership, right? He gave me credibility because he spent time with me and he gave me that confidence. But he also, when I was writing my book, I would go to him a lot and we would talk about my ideas, and he made me feel like I had something to say. He always made time for me. And then when I wrote my book, he did the afterword for it. And then he did the audio. So we have his voice and that kind of thing that he would do for people that was like, wow, Warren Bennis. People still to this day, they're like, Warren Bennis did, you know, and that kind of thing. And you don't even realize it. You realize it, but you don't realize it sometimes until later. You're like, oh my God, Warren Bennis gave me the time and gave me the confidence that I had something to say. And it's such a gift, such a gift.
voice is something particularly that women struggle for. And Tom Peters, to his credit, did the same thing for me. I mean, he actually asked me to fill in as a guest columnist for one of his columns. He literally gave me voice. And in those years, not many men were giving women opportunities for voice and crediting voice. And I think that they did that not out of any kind of, oh, this is au courant, what we should be doing. It is simply who they were as human beings.
Yes.
And for those of us who had the good luck, I don't know how else to describe it, to cross their paths, we got something that other people didn't. And that has served us our entire career. That is a richness that, makes me cry as even I think about it. Because so few people in those years really, and even now, hell, even now, so few people really get what we got. So I feel
The thing about Warren is, as you're talking about this, is he didn't care what your title was or where your positional power was. He thought, wow, here's this young woman and she has, in this role she's playing, this is really interesting. She has something to say. So that's the thing about him. And he would notice someone in the center that was new, or he'd want to get to know them, or it didn't matter. Oh, here's somebody's new assistant. No, you're part of the community. Who are you? And I want to get to know you. And so that kind of aspect of his humanity was who he was as a leader, which is what he was about his teachings, right? And you saw it as a young woman. And it's amazing, right? The impact and the lasting impact.
Sorry, how did he have time?
I was so thinking
generous,
that,
right?
I was
Like,
just
it takes time. It really takes time. Like these days, we act like we just don't have time for that. Where did he get all that time?
I don't know.
He didn't, because he didn't have the phone. He resisted the cell phone. Remember, Kate?
Yeah.
He really did, because we spend so much time. If we got off our phones, I think we'd have more time for human connection.
Yeah. But even so, people running businesses are always like, I don't have time. I don't.
I know.
So
yeah.
that is really key, to prioritize that one-on-one in-person time.
Yes.
Listening to other people. And also the other thing I'm really hearing is this sense that everybody is interesting. Everybody.
Yes.
Everybody
absolutely.
has a story. Dad used to always say that if someone's boring, it's because we're not asking the right questions.
Right.
Yeah.
So Joline, did you ever work with Dad? I mean, aside from Polaroid, did you do any writing together, or did he bring you in to consult with him, or on any kind of collaboration?
How it comes into us. I worry that we aren't good yet at figuring out how to pass along his wisdom, or anyone's wisdom, in that way. We're so here and now oriented. And part of me is there too. I'm Ram Dass. It was be here now. And part of me really strives to do that. And yet there is something about what he offered up that I think is important to pass for or shoot forward somehow.
What do you think Dad would be saying about the state of the world and leadership now?
I think he would say that we have people who are so-called in charge who have no sense of themselves, no consciousness, no self-awareness, who have concrete in their head, I think is what he would say. Because how else do you explain the kind of hate and greed and selfishness? Honestly, I sound absolutely crazy saying this, but all my life, I thought of evil, for example, as a metaphor. I now believe it walks among us, incarnate, and we can point to it. I don't know what he would say. I mean, this was a man who had his own spiritual quest. He was very spiritual and explored everything. I don't know. He might agree with me that evil walks amongst us right now. I think he would be appalled.
What do you think? What do you think he would say to help us?
Oh, I think he would say that leadership from the heart as humanity has never been more critical. And I completely agree with that. I think one of the things, if he were here, I would be sitting in his office or having coffee or a glass of wine with him. And what I would be pitching is, how do we start leadership for little children? Because in this country, we used to have Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, Cub Scouts, all kinds of cool things that intentionally taught leadership skills to little ones. Those things aren't cool any longer. Kids aren't doing those. They are going off on these club sports all over that are just, it's another big business enterprise. It is not teaching leadership. And so right now, we do not have mechanisms in this country for teaching leadership with heart to little kids.
Wow, that is so important. And that is one of the reasons that University of Cincinnati for me is so exciting for this particular kind of program, because it's younger. It's not children, but it's still 18, 17, 18, 19 starting. And they have the co-op program. So people are already out into the world having a sense of agency.
Bounce is for children 4 to 10. And I describe it as my own subversive attempt to get in some of these teachings starting very early that they aren't getting any other way, because earlier is better. And I think if Warren were here and I went and said, listen, I need to do more on leadership in Bounce, what do you suggest? We would be talking about that for months. He would have extraordinary ideas. And so for me, it is a real loss that he is not here, because I think he'd be an advocate.
Tell us about Bounce a little bit more. So it's financial literacy?
No, it is financial readiness for children 4 to 10. And the focus is values, language, early skill development. The idea is we learn to walk, talk, or we develop moral centers developmentally, as you both well know. And we also now know there is a developmental approach to financial fluency. And yet, most of the time, families don't want to talk about money ever, but certainly not with their young kids. And certainly families who have some level of abundance are terrified about what their kids are going to ask them. And so they put it off until, honestly, it's almost too late, 16, 17, 18, sometimes 35 and 40. And what I've understood for the last 3 decades is, when you start when children are 4, 5, and 6, it is just normal. It is not a big deal, and there is much less drama about it. So because my work has been so bespoke, one family after a time, it hasn't been practical to really address this in any significant way. Bounce is the first real mechanism to scale a bespoke financial readiness program for little children. So I'm exceedingly excited about it. It's interesting, this is an aside, but the business plan, the deck, is all about direct to consumer to high net worth and ultra high net worth families. But Northern Trust, Rockefeller Cap, and about 5 other companies are now talking to us because they can see that that's where we've all been missing the boat.
I think the overlap here with Dad is there's something about individual agency.
Yes.
I read a song, or I heard it on the radio, I can't remember, that they're finding in kids that the kids who from a younger age have a sense of agency and being needed.
Yes.
Being needed by the family. Like, your chore is important. Your whatever it is, that you are needed in the world, they're much less likely to become hopeless and depressed.
Exactly.
I feel like what you're doing there is giving kids that respect. It's giving them respect and gravitas from a young age.
It's respect and it's purpose. You have something to do here. I think one of the things people fear and then comes to life is this notion that children growing up with abundance will be entitled. Well, it's not so much that they're entitled as they just don't know where they belong. When everybody does stuff for them, they don't have to do anything. It's like, why am I here? What's my purpose? And I think that is something else that Warren understood, that self-knowledge, self-discovery is about being purposeful.
Mhm.
And those of us who crossed his path, we got that. So
Joline,
that might be another part of the Cincinnati program, that is helping young people identify their purpose that is core to what they get coming out on the other side.
Yeah,
Yeah,
purposes.
absolutely. What were you
Yeah.
going to say, Betsy?
Oh, have you heard of Sean Covey's book, 7 Habits of Happy Kids?
Yes,
Yeah.
actually. I haven't seen it, to be honest, but I
Yeah.
know it's out there. Have you read it?
Well, so when Maddie was in second grade, her second grade teacher taught that in class.
Oh,
And it
cool.
was really, really great because Maddie learned those habits of first things first. I remember do your homework first before you play, some things like that, kindness to others. And Maddie got
Right.
a lot out of that. It was learning at 7 to be your own, have agency and be your own little leader
Yep.
of self. And anyways, it was this very simple stories that these 7-year-olds could grasp. I just thought it was so great because again, you're learning to read and write, but nobody's really talking about these kinds of things.
Right. Right.
And
Yeah.
I always come back to that great quote. I'm sure I told you this, Jolene and Betsy, that when I was visiting Charles Handy a few years ago, and I said, "What are you working on now?" And he said, "I'm writing a book for my grandchildren." And I said, "Oh, what's it about?" And he said, "I want them to do what they do best to the best of their ability for the good of others."
Yes.
And it's that last line that I feel like we're not teaching kids any. But in my
Yeah.
kids' experience, it was Anya left a club soccer team for her varsity team because the varsity coach instilled a sense of purpose and meaning that the club team was about winning, right? It just did
Right.
not have that cohesive sense of vision and purpose.
Yes.
Exactly.
That's
Exactly.
she was a rare coach, Marcel, she was a rare coach.
It's true. It's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
So, Jolene, what do you, in terms of your work, you've done so many different things. I want to hear just a little bit about the evolution of your work, because I remember you saying once, "I am not a financial person, but nobody else was doing it."
Yeah.
I just want to hear how you went from being a clinical social worker, which I am too, so I remember that, and you're from Maine. So you're a clinical social worker that moves into a business. And then tell us your trajectory, how you ended up doing what you're doing now, because I think it's fascinating. And I think that for kids listening to this, it's kind of nice to know just what you think you're going to be doing now may not be where you end up.
Okay. So grew up in a family business, ended up marrying into, it wasn't exactly a family business, but it was a family that owned a big part of the timber in the state of Maine. And so I married essentially into another culture. I mention that because it's an important part of why I do what I do today. So I married into a family with extraordinary resources, and it was a different culture. And that marriage lasted for 5 years, and I just wasn't going to be a good Tea Party Junior League serving woman. That's just not who I was going to be. And so I got out of that and went to graduate school and thought I would be a pretty traditional Jane Addams social worker. That was my path at that point. And I loved it. And I worked in state hospitals and I worked with schizophrenic children and in the trenches of really the hard stuff, but learning a ton. And then weirdly, in graduate school, I came across this paper. It was Mental Health in the Workplace. It had been commissioned by Elliot Richardson and written by a guy named James O'Toole. And I didn't know James O'Toole from Adam, but the paper was revolutionary because for the first time for me, it brought together, the social work skills with having grown up in a family business. And I understood the connection between work and mental health. And so it was like, whoa, I've got to go down that path. And so as luck or the fates will have it, there was a little tiny notice on a bulletin board in grad school that said Polaroid was looking for an intern. And I spent months killing myself to get that internship because God damn it, I was going to have that. And when I got there finally, because I did get it, I discovered nobody else wanted it. I'd had no competition whatsoever. So that led me off to the Polaroid Corporation. And because it was such an open place, Edwin Land was a wild guy, and he brought in people like Warren Bennis. I went from very traditional clinical therapy with employees and officers in the company to what was then affirmative action and women's issues. And I was doing a whole lot of things that were opening up a whole lot of areas that ended up, I think, eventually, Betsy, you and I crossed paths. And fast forward considerably, I do a spin-off business from the Polaroid Corporation, and I think this was another 5-year stint, but it was called Odysseum, teaching people how to see. And that business, it's another whole longer story. There's a Harvard Business School case study on it, which is crazy, but it's a fascinating case study. But in any event, I sell that in 1990 and get a call from Inc. magazine. Oh, no, I think this is probably important. 1989, it must have been. Inc. magazine does a cover story on their 10th anniversary magazine, and the title on the cover was America's Dream Team of Entrepreneurs. And it was Ben and Jerry, it was Paul Hawken, it was, that whole crowd. And I opened it up expecting to see some of my friends because, of course, Betsy, you and I were in that world then. There were some killer women out there.
Yeah.
And Mrs. Fields' husband was in that issue. Not Mrs. Fields, but Mrs. Fields' husband. And I remember being in my office and going through the magazine that day, and I was absolutely in a state. And so I ripped off this letter and sent it over to Inc. magazine. And to his credit, George Gendron, who knew your dad well, picked up the phone and called me. Editors did not call people who wrote letters to the editor in those days. And so he invited me to lunch and we went to Legals and we had this killer conversation. And at the end, he didn't really know what to do with me and I didn't know what to do. But I said, I think Inc. should pay to have me go around and talk to these women and I'll get their stories and bring them back to you and you can start covering them better. And I think he was just so nonplussed. He just said, okay. And I ended up running, I think, 7 or 8 of the best dinner parties of my young life that Inc. paid for. And that led to my first book, Our Wildest Dreams, which led to Oprah and all the work I then began to do with NABO and all of those organizations. And I would say that I was at that point poised to get really active in the women's entrepreneur community. I was already beginning to be a little bit known because of the book there. However, when I'd finished those interviews, what I cared about was what would have been different had somebody talked to those women about money when they were little girls. And I'm trained developmentally, so I thought, well, surely there must be something developmental in this. And of course, no one had ever taken that on. And so that was the beginning for me of deciding, well, we need to have a developmental approach to financial education. And honestly, I just went out and did it. Raising financially fit kids was the outcome of that. And it was just kind of a fluke that I was doing a favor for a friend whose family had gobs of money and been around for generations. And I did some work for their family meeting and Jay Hughes was there. I don't know if that name means anything to you, but Jay Hughes, God, it would surprise me if Jay Hughes lives in Aspen. And I have to believe Warren and Jay crossed paths somehow. I'll have to ask Jay if they knew. But in any event, at that point, Jay started to introduce me to these ultra high net worth families, all of whom were scared to death about what entitlement will do to their children. And here's where we get back to leadership. So in those years where I was with Inc. and hanging out, doing stuff with women entrepreneurs and at Polaroid and beyond, I was starting to hang out with the Tom Peters of the world and the Jim O'Toole's and all of the people who were writing about management thinking in those days. And so today, my entire success with families has everything to do with the fact that instead of drawing on the institutional knowledge of wealth consulting, I draw on the institutional knowledge that came out of Warren, Tom, Jim, that whole crowd. And I have been applying their ideas to family systems in a way that very few other people do. So it was Steve Jobs who said, you can't make sense of your life looking ahead. You have to look back to make sense of it. That whole crazy path of this and that, and it looks like I'm a dilettante and I don't know what the hell I'm doing. Now I come back and I say, no, all that stuff that along the way, now I pour into my work with families and children. And I think each of us, if we look back, can make that same weird. We're doing some work in Bounce right now, and somebody said, well, how do you do a really good visual of life? And somebody else said, remember Candyland, the board? And I thought, oh my God, Candyland and Chutes and Ladders. We were being told when we were little ones, that's really what life is about. It's all these detours and chutes and ladders and up and down. It is not linear. And looking back, I think, oh my God, it was right there in front of us when we were 5 years old. But of course, we had no way of understanding. And so now I look back and I say, yeah, my life was chutes and ladders and Candyland. And I was just really lucky that on my chutes and ladders, I got to meet these amazing human beings from whom I took these very cool lessons.
So what do you think it is in you that made you open to those lessons, right? Don't you think sometimes that some other people were in the room? So if we're going to be talking to these younger kids, what is that quality that you had that made you influenceable or open or whatever? What do you think that is? And where do you get that?
That is the nature nurture question again. I say to myself, when I ask myself that question in the dead of night, I will say, I'm just very resilient, which is true. But I also think I was so fortunate. I had these amazing mentors along the way. I did. And even from the time of 7th grade to 12th in Bangor, Maine, life threw me this crazy turn of events. I have not yet written about it, though I will soon. I was raised by 7 families. And I say that to say that my mother was my teacher in the 6th grade in this little tiny town in Maine. And there were 3 children in my class. And on a lovely spring day in April, when I was in the 6th grade, there were 2 floors, 3, 4, 5 downstairs, 6, 7, 8 upstairs. I was upstairs. I pulled the fire alarm and emptied the school. My mother, I'm sure, decided that day she was simply not going to teach her daughter again anymore. That was it. And so in the 7th grade, she gave up her job as the principal teacher in this little 2-room schoolhouse. And I ended up in Bangor, Maine, in a junior high with 250 kids. So I went from 3 kids to 250 kids. And it was very clear early on that if I were to have any kind of social life, I'd have to find friends to spend the night with there, because it was a 45-minute drive over a 2-lane highway between Bangor and where I lived. And over the course of those next 6 years, there literally were these 7 families, Catholic, Jewish, Episcopal. One was an alcoholic. There was a doctor. I mean, they could not have been more diverse. It was crazy. And in order to survive, I had to learn how to not to be kicked out, not to lose my different homes so I could be part of school stuff after school. I had to just figure out how to adapt to 7 different cultures. Essentially, that's what I now understand. And that was early training. Now it doesn't matter what family I go into to work with. It's like, yeah, just another family, just another culture. Nothing seems too weird or strange to me. It's like, yeah, I get it. So I'm not for a moment saying that life is about luck. I do think life is about amazing immersions and experiences and mentors. And partly luck had it there for me, but partly I made it happen.
Yeah, you
And
fought for that internship at Polaroid, it sounds like. That was a big, yeah.
I fought for that. I clearly had to figure out how to get places to stay overnight. I mean, I was chair of this and president of that all through junior high and high school. And that was as truly as an introvert. So clearly I was fighting early on for stuff. But there was another quote I came across just last night. I'll send it to you when we get off. It's another Steve Jobs. He's doing an interview with somebody. It's very down-homey. And he says, look, at the end of the day, you have to act. You have to take action. You can't just wait for things to happen to you.
I talk to artists and speakers and my children, and I'm always like, don't wait to be picked.
Right.
Right? It's so passive, just waiting. Is someone going to pick me? Are they going to think I'm great? Stop waiting to be picked. Pick yourself. Take action. I love that. Did you, just about your mom in the schoolhouse, did you see that French movie, Être et avoir? Have you ever seen that movie?
Oh.
I'll send you the trailer for it. It's so wonderful. It's about a teacher in a one-room schoolhouse in France. And it's a documentary and it's beautiful.
Okay.
You will love it. Yeah, I'll send you that. And then I'm just thinking about you going from house to house to house, that sense of being adaptive, not losing yourself.
Right.
Right? Which is different. It's that flexibility and agility in life.
Yes.
What a lesson.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, when I think back to having to figure out the rules in my friend Leslie's house it's a Catholic family with 5 kids, and there are rules there. If you're going to exist in this household and get things done, by God, you're going to do things. And I just dropped in and did my part in order not to be a pain in the neck to anybody. And then I would go over to my friend Lenore's house. She was an only child in the Jewish part of town, as we had in those days, a pretty luxe lineup there. Her mother did everything for her daughter. Couldn't have been more different. And yet it didn't seem weird to me at all that you had these 2 very different cultures. It was like, yeah, that's Leslie's house, that's Lenore's house, and Linda's is different and Kate's is different still. I don't think it ever occurred to me that they should all be alike. I mean, in retrospect, I wonder what my critical thinking skills were in those days. They may have been limited.
Well, I think it connects right back to what you said at the very beginning about pay attention. You had to watch and figure out what is the culture.
Yes, it's all
here,
about that.
And that is really a skill. And
Yeah.
I'm sure that you brought that with you when you left the social work world, the mental health world, and moved into the business world. What is the culture here?
Yeah, I think that's right. And I think when you go back and read about Warren's life, he was doing that all the time. I mean, the man crossed cultures everywhere.
All the time. He said he always felt like an outsider, that he loved going to the military because they told him what to wear, what was expected. Then he got to Antioch, suddenly got a tweed jacket and a pipe, and a haircut and a bow tie.
And that's such a great example. I mean, could 2 planets be more different than the military in Antioch? It's like, right. No.
What I think is interesting about both you and Dad is that you were adapting while maintaining your core sense of self. You didn't become a businesswoman in the Polaroid cutout kind of way. You were a clinical social worker. You were a mental health worker within that.
Yes.
That's a really interesting skill. Betsy, in the curriculum development, there's that whole piece of looking at the
Yes, it's really interesting because it seems like that's what leaders have to do, right? Is how do you stay yourself, but also adapt to the organization, to the culture of which you're leading. And authenticity, people say, but if I have to change that way, then I'm not being my authentic self. And I've always said, no, you're being strategic to succeed in the environment in which you're in. And so that, I think, is a really important skill that we need to include in this curriculum. Because part of what we're trying to do, Joline, is pull the jewels from these amazing interviews to what is the key curriculum for the Institute, but also we're thinking about curriculum for leaders for executive programs. So it's even bigger than just students.
Yes. Yes.
Right? So if you were going to take your work and give us a module, let's say, for the University of Cincinnati undergraduates, what do you think in the work that you do would be something they would need in terms of leadership?
I think back to, again, my first book, Our Wildest Dreams. I think it's all about helping you hold on to voice. I think it is, what is your voice? Where does it come from? What is it you're hoping to do with it? Certainly for women, but also for a lot of men too. Voice that isn't mean, voice that isn't punitive. How do you use your voice in a powerful, leaderful way that is not there to bash somebody? I think for me, that's what it comes down to. I don't know, voice with heart or voice with it's voice, certainly voice with authority. Let me be clear. I think I walk into any situation and I am there to listen, but I am also there to make it clear I have some authority here. I think that takes some training and practice. So maybe understanding that exercising voice in a positive way isn't just some magic that happens. It is a practice, and you have to be mindful of it and respectful of it and use it and try it out.
How do you balance authority with humility?
So I remember going into, in the early days of first giving talks, I always had great anxiety, nervousness about going into a big audience, until finally, I remember saying to myself years and years and years and years ago now, Joline, this is not about you. This is about that audience. You have got to go show them the love. And from the moment that it switched for me and I realized this isn't about me, it is about making them feel good, everything changed. And I think that is when you begin to understand your voice is not there just for you, it is to make the connection.
And as soon as we put our attention on the audience, on the other person, on the other people, it's so freeing.
It's so
worrying about ourselves and what do I look like, and am I going to remember my lines or whatever? Yeah, all of those boomerang thoughts are just keep us kind of stuck. I love that. Thank you. Wait, there was one of the
there's a Tom story that connects to that very quickly. So I'm sure I shared this with you when I was there, but it was the time that I followed Tom Peters. And in those years, following Tom Peters was hell. I mean, you know what he's like.
He was like, he's just so dynamic. I know.
He takes over the stage and he eats up the audience. And I was to follow him. And I remember watching him thinking, I can't follow him. What, are you crazy? But I'd had this killer coach who had once said to me, Jolene, if you ever get in trouble, you just imagine the place you're most comfortable and you recreate that. And he, of course, had the lights up and he was all over the stage and it was wild. And so I had them turn down the lights and bring out a cup of coffee and a stool. And I did sort of the anti-Tom environment and sat there and told my story very quietly. Could not have been more different. It saved me. There were people crying in the audience. For me, that was another turning point to be yourself. Just be who you are. I mean, Tom is Tom, and nobody does Tom better than Tom.
Absolutely. Oh my gosh, I love that story. I think I told this in one of these podcasts where Dad had to follow Charles Handy at his own event at USC. And when he realized it, Charles was riveting. We were all just listening like this. And then Dad looked down and he goes, I'm next? Are you kidding me? I have to follow Charles Handy? It was so upsetting. Oh, Jolene, is there anything else? But is there anything else, Betsy, that you're thinking we should ask? Pay attention is so big. Voice is so big.
Yeah, the authenticity. I just love the whole being able to adapt. I think that's really, really. How would you teach that, do you think, Jolene?
Yeah. You have to encourage people to put themselves in scary situations and hang in there. For me, Outward Bound was I went through 2 Outward Bound programs, and I have my issues with Outward Bound for other reasons, but I have to say those were scary for me. And yet And I had to figure out my boundaries. I did not do every single thing they wanted me to do, but even that was about boundary setting. So I think you have to put yourself in situations where you are forced to learn.
And
And
so
then,
maybe it's the experimental piece of it, right, that we do with students on this particular piece.
yeah, yeah, I do encourage a lot of the kids I work with to go through. They need to be stretched somehow, and
Right.
I don't know how else to give it to them.
Is there anything else that you want to add about dad, or if you were taking a leadership course, what do you want in that course?
One last thing, joy.
Oh,
God, there are nights I remember being with Warren and other
Mm.
people, and he was a joyful man. I mean, racked with other issues, let's be clear, but the man knew joy. And I don't know how you integrate that into your programs, but don't don't leave it out.
Yeah,
I
I
think
love that.
that's incredibly important. It's funny because, he lived through World War II and the crises during the 60s with all these terrible assassinations. And he was running a university basically during the riots. I mean, he really saw and he was Jewish, so he saw a lot of anti-Semitism. I mean, there's so much that he saw and lived through, but he saw the good in people. He saw the good in life all the time. He just
Yes.
sucked the marrow out of life every day. So that's kind of an amazing lesson. I try to remember. Yeah. Oh, I was thinking if we were going to include one of your books in the curriculum.
Oh.
Sounds like Our Wildest Dreams might be a great one.
Actually, Our Wildest Dreams would be the one I would include.
Yeah. For men and women.
Yeah, yeah.
Right?
I
Yeah.
have to go back and read that. It's been forever.
It's been, it's like 30 years. It's crazy. You might also want to take a look at the Harvard Business School case.
Yeah. Okay.
I still get, it's clearly it's being taught still, because I get an email every now and then from somebody, and it's a very polarizing case in that there are some people who think I was genius and brilliant, and others who think, how did they let her get away with that?
You were proactive. You proactively wrote that letter to the Inc. editor.
Oh, yeah.
And that
You
changed
then
your
met
life.
with him, and then you came up with this idea.
Yeah.
Just out of the blue, it sounds like, sitting there with him. This idea comes to you, you put it out there, and you ask for it. That sense of being proactive, that's having a voice, right? And who knows? A lot of people can say no. People can say no, but he didn't.
Right.
And you never know. You didn't wait for him to pick you.
Right.
And it changed your life. Changed your life.
Yes.
Changed your life.
Going back to what you said earlier
Yes.
to me too, is waiting for people to tap you on the shoulder,
Right.
which can
So
be a
there's
very
this big piece that I sense here with you, Joline, about this being proactive, which is so key for all students and leaders and teachers.
I lost my company in 2014. I lost it. I lost everything, every penny. It was gone. 20 years of building a company, and this man took it. That was 2014. And, I often say there were then years of wandering in the wilderness. It was like 20 years I'd spent building this damn company, and it was about to be sold to Northern Trust when suddenly I lost it and everything. And now what I say to people is, listen, I love what I'm doing right now. I probably wouldn't be doing what I'm doing had I not lost that company. And it is because finally, after wandering the wilderness for a while, I picked it up and I had another idea, another plan, and I have been intent on making this happen. And it really looks like, oh my God, it's actually happening now.
Well, there's Dad's crucible.
Yes, exactly.
Right?
The crucible.
There's your crucible.
Absolutely. And I realized at some point that I could spend the rest of my life and be bankrupt and angry and bitter, or I could walk away. And I finally said, I have to walk away from this. But I was in a state of pure red hot rage for a period of time because it was a loss. I'd gone through a number of losses in my life, but this one took on a new dimension.
and a financial loss, sounds like too.
Oh, yeah. Psychic and financial.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But Joline, the other part of your story is resilience.
Oh, yeah.
Big
Yeah.
time resilience, because stuff happens to us in life, personally and
yes,
professionally, and then you like, what? Who am I now? Right. And so all
And
that's like
yeah,
a huge piece of leadership in life and our whole trajectory, right? When you get punched in the face, how do you get back up? Not to be cynical. You created this whole new company and organization.
yep. We're tough. Persistence. What is it? Elizabeth Warren, we persist.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. I think we got to let you go, Jolene. I can't
Yes,
thank you enough.
indeed.
This is
This
such
is
a gift. Such a
Oh
gift
my
to
God,
me.
there's so much here. This
Oh,
is so
such a
Well,
gift.
great.
sure we'll be talking again, and it was lovely to spend time with you this afternoon. So
Absolutely.
thank
Thank
you
you
very,
so
very
much.
much.
Well, I hope
And
you
thank
can
you
join us.
from the university and all the students that are going to get a chance to
Yes.
hear about you.
And I
And
hope
all
All
right.
right. Take
Thank you.
care.
training
Thank
be
you.
continued.
Bye-bye. Yes.
Bye.